So I've been hearing a lot of people talk about how their gardens aren't as productive as they'd like them to be this year. Now, there's a lot of factors that go into that, but I have a suspicion that a lot of that has to do with soil fertility. You know, a lot of us have been gardening for a while now. Maybe you started in 2020, you have a couple years under your belt, and you didn't need to worry about your soil fertility when you started. But now you've been taking all that stuff out of the soil for several years now, and it's time to put it back. And that's a problem that I've been dealing with this year in my own garden. So today I'm going to show you exactly how I'm remedying that problem without having to go to the garden store and buy a bunch of synthetic stuff to make it happen. As you can see, we're kind of in that jungle phase of the garden. It's late summer and a lot of the crops are on their way out. And so I've been assessing what went right and what went wrong this year. And I think this was one of the first years that I really started to notice some of the deficiencies that showed up in the soil test. So nitrogen was one of the nutrients that I was really low on out in these beds. And I think some of these beds are better than others because I have a little bit of different soil in some of them. But I did notice this year for the first time ever that certain plants just weren't as vigorous. Like take this watermelon, for example. Now, it has some other stuff growing in here because we've kind of given up on the weeding. But check out the growth here. We have a few baby melons, but nothing crazy. But check out this growth here as compared to the watermelons in my greenhouse. So the watermelons here in the greenhouse, you can see the difference is substantial. We started these seeds the same time as the ones that are in the garden. And obviously, these have had a little more heat, but everything else about them has been the same other than the soil. And we know from our soil test that the soil in my greenhouse is high in nitrogen and the soil in my outdoor garden is low in nitrogen. Now, I'm still getting growth out there, but it's definitely not as robust, obviously, is what you're seeing here in the greenhouse. And I know you're gonna ask me this, so I'm gonna tell you now. You do wanna kinda sling these guys up. He just happens to be hanging down. But you can see with these other melons, we are tying them up. This is the first year we've grown in trellises, so we're doing some experimentation, but it's working out well, I would say. So the next question is, how do we fix this nitrogen deficiency in the soil? You have a couple options, of course. We can go the conventional route of adding in a commercial nitrogen fertilizer. That's what they would do with big agriculture, right? Corporate farming. We could add in high nitrogen compost. That's one thing I've done in years past, although the soil test also revealed that my compost pile is kind of low in nitrogen. So I may add manure to my soil, but I'm not quite sure that's going to be enough. Or option number 3, which is my personal new favorite, cover crops. So I had heard people talk about cover crops for many, many years, and they always felt kind of confusing to me. I didn't know when I would plant them, how I would plant them, if I could plant them with my vegetables, so I just kind of ignored them for a long time. But a couple of years ago, I did a podcast interview with a gentleman from True Leaf Market, the seed company that I absolutely love, and he officially converted me into the world of cover crops, and let me tell you, these are fantastic. Cover crops are a method that have been used for thousands of years, and in essence what we're doing is when we're done with our other harvest, we are planting a different variety of plant in our growing spaces to give us all sorts of different benefits before the next growing season comes along. So as you can see, I have a lot of cover crop seeds here with me, and each of these are going to do something slightly different. So you can help the soil in your garden become less compacted, you can give it more nitrogen, you can give it more biomass and organic matter, you can help to fight off pests and weeds with cover crop seeds. First time I ever used cover crops were in these 4 beds that are surrounding me right now. For some reason, when we were filling these with soil, they got the worst of the pile. They got the clay fill dirt. And I have struggled with this soil for many years. And so I thought I would try something new. And I planted these 4 beds with winter rye last year. That's a grain. And winter rye is awesome because it has really long roots and it can help break up hard, compacted soil. So what I did is I planted the seeds all over late September, watered it as much as I could before my hoses froze up, and let it go. And I got some growth throughout the winter. It went dormant when it got really cold, but then the following spring it came back with a vengeance. So I had this giant crop of rye, and I needed to still be able to plant tomatoes here. So I took my weed whacker and I whacked down the plants as short as I could, kind of scalped it. And I wanted to kill the plants because I needed them to die off so I could be ready for my tomatoes. Then I let that mass of roots sit here for a week or two, and then I dug holes in it, kind of like I was planting something in a lawn that was dead and drying out, and I put my tomato seedlings there. And let me tell you, I had the best tomato crop ever planting it within the rye. And I even had fewer weeds and issues like that because the root mass of the rye kept everything else under control while the tomatoes grew. And I didn't ever have to till it or rip it out. I just let it decompose, and it made my soil even better. So we're still working on these beds, but they're getting much improved thanks to cover crops. Now, this year, my problem is a little different. I need nitrogen in addition to helping break up my soil and give it some of that biomass. So I still love winter rye, but I'm gonna pick a different variety for this year. And if you wanna try the seeds from True Leaf, cover crops or otherwise, you can head on over to theprairiehomestead.com/seeds and use code homestead-10 to save $10 off your order of $50 or more. And that code is good through the end of October, so go check it out, homestead-10 over at True Leaf Market. So I have these other beds that don't need as much breaking up of the soil. What they really need is more nitrogen. So legumes like peas, beans, clover, alfalfa, they're nitrogen fixers, which means they literally take nitrogen from the air and bring it into the soil. I don't know anything that's more amazing than that. So I'm going to be planting these beds right now, it's end of August at the time of this recording, to get some more nitrogen into my soil without having to go to the garden store and add the synthetic stuff here this year. Now, sometimes you may have soil that needs more than one thing. So maybe you have hard soil that also needs nitrogen. I love that True Leaf has a cover crop mix that kind of addresses all the issues at once. So this mix has legumes, it has some brassicas like mustard and radish, and those are going to help repel pests and keep weeds down. And it also has some of the grains like the winter rye and such. So you're going to have that breaking up action happening as well. So if you're not quite sure what your soil needs, you're not going to go wrong with getting a mix like this. So I think the timing with cover crops used to be what bothered me or intimidated me the most. You can plant them in the spring before you put your vegetables in. We usually have snow on the ground till May, so that doesn't quite work for me as well. I like to plant them in the fall. Now you can plant them later into the fall, and when I planted my winter rye, I put it in late September, and it had already frozen once or twice, but we still had warm enough days to get things germinating. But since I have some beds here that just didn't do well this year, I decided to rip those crops out early because they weren't going to produce anyway, and get my cover crops in a little bit ahead of the game. So I'm going to let these grow through the rest of the fall. We'll have some more nice weather here, even if I have some frosts here and there, and then just let them sit all winter. When springtime comes around, then I will chop them down and let everything decompose and plant right here in the crops. So you don't have to have raised beds to use cover crops. You can totally use them in in-ground gardens. You can use them in greenhouses, in rows. You can sow them between other crops, you know, kind of as a walkway cover. So they're really useful, and they're a really sustainable way to nurture your soil. So you just broadcast your cover crops on the soil. You don't really plant them in fancy rows, which is great for me because you know how I am about fancy things. There's probably better, more accurate ways to do this, but this is how I do it. So I like these big bags from True Leaf because I do go through the cover crop seed because I plant quite a bit in these beds. But you don't have to get these big bags. You can get the little seed packets too. They have all different sizes. I'm just going to kind of lightly rake it in. I don't want to go super deep with these. So I wouldn't say these are high maintenance, but you do want to make sure they're staying wet enough to germinate. Right now, I can still use my irrigation system, but once we freeze, or if I was planting these later in the year, I would just do it with a hose because this doesn't work once we get really cold. So if you've been thinking about cover crops or you've been hearing about them and you've just been feeling like they were out of your reach, I want to really encourage you to give them a try. I feel like it's that missing link in a lot of organic gardens. Whether you need your soil broken up, you need more nitrogen, you're trying to repress weeds, they're a really good, organic, sustainable option. And the more we feed our soil, the better our gardens get.